that yet, but I will start with a little story about what's going on. I'll talk a little about what's going on now, and then if we have time, a little of the history. I called Treasury the other day because, as many of you know, I was really involved in creating the exchange program and worked with Rangel's staff and Barney Frank's staff to formulate it and get it into the House bill. And I was really shocked and disappointed with what came out from Treasury and from HUD the other day, and Ronnie identified those really three major issues, two on the Treasury side and one on the HUD side. So I called a bunch of people in Treasury. I don't know any of them, but I got some names. I called them. I got a call back from somebody. So this is the way the conversation went. I've had some experience with the exchange program. I was saying, and I'm really concerned about what the Treasury is doing. And the person at the other side said, well, what are your concerns? I said, well, for example, there's no loans. It's just a grant. And secondly, the money has to be expended by the end of 2010. And his response was, well, we really want to get the money out the door. And the second thing he said was, well, if we give loans rather than grants, and if we don't get the money out the door by the end of 2010, how are we helping investors? And I had to explain to him that the exchange program is a program that doesn't have investors, that it's not an investor-driven program. The person who called me obviously had no idea how the exchange program was intended to work, or even what the language in the law said. So, that's really disappointing to me personally, and I'm sure disappointing to everybody here and everybody around the country that's trying to get the housing built and using the exchange program as a way of getting credits out of the marketplace and getting the housing built and the jobs started, and narrowing the amount of available credit so that the investors can start competing for the credit that's remaining available, rather than having their just complete say over what deals to do and at what price. So what I've been doing since last Wednesday, almost nonstop, is trying to work with the folks that I know, and now I know all of you, and I'm going to ask you to do the same thing, of contacting people in Treasury, either through your state representatives or your Congress people, or through whatever mechanism you think is best for you, and tell them the way the program was supposed to work. I'm not saying, and I don't think anybody is saying, you can't make grants, but we're saying certainly make it the choice of each state allocating agency whether to make a grant or a loan. And interesting, on the web broadcast that I did listen to, sort of every paragraph or two, they would say things like, oh, we're really trying to make this user-friendly. We're really trying to make it easy for the state agencies and for the developers. And then they throw in the zinger, which my real perception is that they didn't really understand what they did, which I think is really unfortunate, but we need to educate them, and I think we need to educate them right away. So I would really encourage people to act quickly in whatever capacity that you can. And I think it's really just three issues. Two at Treasury, and I identified which ones they were. And Ken said earlier, what construction lender is going to make a loan not knowing whether the public funds are going to be in the deal in time not to be recaptured? And for 2007, 2008 deals that are ready to go, shovel-ready theoretically, maybe they can get started very quickly and be done by the end of 2010. But if the state's going to hold back some of the exchange money for cost cert to know that they haven't overfunded the deal, then you got to have time to do the cost cert. And generally, you got to do the cost cert, often after a permanent loan closes. So you might need 4 or 5 months to be able to generate the cost cert from the time completion happens. That in California, that's not an unreasonable period of time. And then the state agency has to actually process it and get it back to you before they can release the last dollars. So if you want to be done by, say, July 2010, you can be pretty assured that you're going to get your money by the end of the year, that the last piece of money that would be coming out of the exchange. But for 2009 deals, at least in California, that aren't going to even get an allocation until September, and they're not, if they're going after the exchange because they can't find an investor, it's going to be October, 45 days, end of October, before they're going to know whether they have an exchange or not. And then they're going to start doing their closing process. They're probably going to close in January, February, March of 2010. There's no way they're going to be done and be able to disperse the funds by the end of the year. So we really need to get to Treasury, or else I'm afraid that what at least in my vision was a real solution to the short-term lack of investor problem in the country is going to turn into, unfortunately, no more jobs and the housing not being built. And I really care about the housing being built and the jobs being done. And at some point, maybe in a few minutes, we'll talk about where we're going for next year. I hope the economy turns around. I really want it to turn around. I want the investors to make their payments again at the dollar level, or 95-cent level, or maybe 90-cent level. But it's unlikely, at least for now, that that's going to happen. And so where we are is we need to make this program work so that we'll have a program next year to keep the developers in business. Because if we can't keep the developers in business, we don't have an infrastructure. If we don't have an infrastructure, we're really in big trouble. So I'll take just a minute or two to talk about the history of this. It's sort of became fortuitous. I had a pretty bad bicycle accident in November, at the beginning of November last year, and I was in bed for 2.5 weeks with a cracked hip and a broken collarbone. And that was the time I sort of figured out, because I knew that investors were walking like crazy in terms of from really middle of August or thereabouts, that investors were really starting to pull back. Prices were starting to drop dramatically. Lenders were starting to pull back. We needed to do something to get those 2008 deals in the ground. And talking to a number of people nationally and locally, kind of came up with the idea that, well, that the Treasury should really exchange the credits for cash. Because if you think about it, if the developer gets the credits and has to exchange them for cash, or the investor gets it, then they don't. If they don't have taxable income, then they're not going to have a need for the losses or the credits. But if they can only exchange the credits and not the losses, then their return is not going to be very good. And they're only going to pay, I figured, about 60 cents per dollar of credit if the investor was going to be able to exchange the credits. And so in noodling around the whole issue, we came up with the idea that Treasury, their cost of borrowing is almost nothing. In the short term, it actually was nothing at the time, and even in the long term, it was just a couple of percent. So if you look at what it cost the Treasury to do the credit program, you have to add both the credits and the losses. And it turns out that the credits really cost the Treasury about 90 cents on a dollar, because if they borrow and spend the money up front, the cost of the borrowing is only about 10 cents. So they really could give us 90 cents. And that doesn't include the losses, which are worth another about 20 cents. So really it cost the Treasury about $1.10 for every dollar of credit. And I said in the stuff that I wrote and published, that they should give us 85 cents, because I figured that was a good target for the amount of money that 2008 projects would want. And I'll just tell you one other funny story and then probably sit down. I got a call after working the system as best I could, mostly through Wrangle and Barney Frank on the House side. I got a call from one of their staff one day and said, okay, we've decided we're going to do this. Wow, that's fantastic. And they read me a couple of points that they made, and they said, we're going to give you 80 cents. I said, well, wait a second. I asked for 85, and I asked for 85 for a reason. And I went through the numbers, just like I did with you, about what is it costing the Treasury, what do developers need to make these deals work. And I said, we really need 85. And they said, okay, you got 85. So that's how sometimes decisions get made that get into laws that we get to benefit from. So I'll be happy to take questions now or later. I really would appreciate your help in trying to straighten out Treasury and HUD.
Any questions, Joel?